Hello, everybody. Thank you, MJ. And everybody, thank you for attending today's session on trauma aware, trauma skilled, and trauma ready. As MJ shared, I'm Ruth Brus, and I work for both Media Education and the Center for College and Career Readiness. Today, I want to share with you some information that we gathered at the center about trauma readiness. A few months ago, we were asked to write a certification program on trauma for the University of Southern California Rossier School of Education. This course was written around three really broad terms: trauma awareness, trauma skilled, and trauma ready. We decided to name it then the T3 certification course. And each of the three trauma modules, the trauma aware, trauma skilled, and trauma ready, really provide guidance for schools and or districts to really begin to create their trauma readiness plans. And we know with everything going on in the world today, it is equally more important than ever to have that trauma ready plan, especially as you begin to reopen your schools. So today I'm going to share with you some of that research and some of the things we learned about each of the T's and kind of get you thinking about what you're going to do for your school or your district. So what we know is that trauma readiness is the goal for each school and district, but you just can't jump to becoming trauma ready without really some professional learning and really some self-reflection. You have to begin with awareness. And when we talk about awareness, we mean a deep understanding of what trauma is and what it isn't. It's really moving from a general understanding of trauma to an expert in understanding its causes and its effects. Trauma and the brain, there's so much information about that. The 3 E's of trauma: the event, the experience, and the effect. Once a school or your district feels they have a strong understanding and a good awareness around trauma, then you become and start moving into trauma skilled. And during this phase, the prevention and response to trauma becomes fluent in a school or district. Becoming trauma skilled really relies on understanding that to change the culture of a school, you have to begin with the classroom as the catalyst for change. Then a clear path from trauma awareness to trauma skilled is when a school or district becomes trauma ready. And this is where the focus is on the day-to-day, really those operations that create a culture of caring and the creation of a trauma-sensitive school or district. This is where we operationalize our responses to trauma and to our students. Moving from that awareness to skill to readiness builds on the following concepts: understanding the causes, effects, and indicators of trauma through both a professional and personal lens. And I can't state enough here that you have to understand it through your own lens as an educator as well. Self-care is equally important. Focusing on building relationships and fostering the capacity to trust. Utilizing strategies such as mindfulness, self-regulation, and executive functioning to really develop coping skills. To build a culture of safety from the inside out through prosocial classroom components. And then a plan for trauma readiness to really ensure that student safety is paramount and your practices are really seamless and timely. The power of this sequence is that it puts the decision-making into the hands of those who are on the front lines, our educators. It truly gives a framework through best practices, but it also will allow freedom for each of your campuses to create a responsive and ready plan that specifically meets the needs of what's happening in your community and on your campus. So let's take a deeper dive in what an educator needs in order to begin to understand as they become trauma aware, that first T. What are we thinking about when we talk about trauma awareness? There's an urgency for schools to become future ready now more than ever. There's a pressure for them to be ready to learn and achieve now more than ever. Even through the COVID epidemic, a major concern that immediately comes to the forefront is student success and their safety. So in pictures and on social media, people love to envision the students at the top of this page, full of hope, smiling, ready to take on the world. However, unfortunately, the reality of the pictures in black and white may be closer to what many of our students are living with. The reason is that many of our students have had adverse childhood experiences, and we call those ACEs. And we know that adverse childhood experiences can come in many forms, from physical and mental abuse to neglect and really just household dysfunction all the way around. Let's take a look at what some of those adverse childhood experiences might be. This is a compiled list from the NCTSN, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, of types of possible traumatic events that affect our children. You can go online and you can find that there are some organizations that have kind of narrowed these down into 10 components, but we kind of pulled from this data for our course. So most of you are probably familiar with a lot of these, and we deal with these, unfortunately, again and again daily with our students, such as physical or sexual abuse, bullying, even neglect. But we have to go beyond what we think is just things we think about when we automatically think of trauma. Trauma can really come in the form of having to have a painful medical procedure, or even a family member having to have something, or witnessing some type of violence, or even witnessing or being a part of a car accident can cause trauma for our students. Those are all ACEs for our students. And these traumatic events often occur in families that are stressed out by things like substance abuse, extreme poverty. There could be mental illness in the family. They might be homeless, or even students that are moving around all the time. Having things like this happen in childhood can have a lasting effect on a student's physical and mental health. And one thing to understand about trauma is that not all trauma is created equal. I cannot stress that enough. Studies have shown that students that may have experienced the exact same type of trauma, but they have different reactions. And we often describe trauma as really living in the body, and how a child experiences, processes, and really copes with trauma is connected to the responses of their own nervous system. When a person is exposed to a traumatic or stressful event, how they experience it greatly influences the long-lasting adverse effects of carrying the weight of trauma. That's why we call these the 3 E's of trauma. What's the event, what's the experience, and what's the effect? And again, not all are equal. These effects can include changes even in a student or an adult's neurobiological makeup, and have difficulty coping, feeling trust, really managing cognitive processes, and regulating behavior. We know that many schools and districts use this simple ACE survey to help determine a student's experiences that might lead to trauma. And if you look at this short little kind of a checkmark quiz, I don't want to say quiz, but just kind of looking at some of this and things that we're looking for adverse childhood experience. For each check, a yes would be one childhood experience. So you can see, for example, in section 1, at any point since you were born, your parents or guardians were separated or divorced, or you live with a household member who served time in jail or prison. Each one of these things would lead to how many adverse childhood experiences you would have. And I want you to notice the word "since you were born." It doesn't mean since the day you entered school. Adverse childhood experiences begin at birth. And so what we know is that many of our students really come to school with one or more of these adverse childhood experiences. And we know that the effects of the ACEs score can affect students not just in the short run, but they really can negatively impact them throughout their lives without any intervention that we put into place or support. This is one of the reasons why it is so key for you and for our schools to ensure that we're trauma aware, we're really trauma skilled, and we're trauma ready. Here's just an example. This young boy, his score is a 4. Without intervention, he is 4.7 times as likely to use drugs and 7.4 times as likely to be an alcoholic when he grows up. This is data from Child Trends. And from the slide, you can see that in the United States, the percentage of students with 0 to 8 ACEs. And you can see that 55% of our students in the United States have 0 ACEs. So if they were to go back and fill out that form, 55% of them would not be able to check any of those, which is great. However, 45% of them have 1 or more of those adverse childhood experiences. So if you think about an average classroom of 28 students, 6 students would have 2 or more adverse childhood experiences. 3 students would have ongoing weekly trauma. And overall, on average, 14 students would have experienced trauma in their childhood. And if you think about struggling learners, you could even double these data points. We have to know this as educators so that we can make a change in our classrooms to help support our students. Students that are coming to school hungry or abused or neglected, or all of the things that are traumatic for them, that are one of these ACEs, it's hard for them to concentrate on school. It's not that they're not able to be successful. They're truly, their brain is not allowing them to really focus in on learning. The ACE indicators also can greatly influence the trajectory of a child. Students with 6 or more ACEs died nearly 20 years earlier than those without ACEs. This was a longitudinal study. I told you I would share with you some of the research. It was done in Wayne County, Michigan. Incoming kindergarten student parents were asked if their child had any of the following events that you see here on the slide. This is very similar to an ACE survey that I just shared with you. So some of the things they were asking: did they have a death of a parent, parental divorce, separation, incarceration, physical neglect, some of the things you can see on here. What they found from this is that the screening showed that 70% of the children in this county had experienced at least 3 traumatic events. This was before they entered kindergarten. And even more alarming was that the study found that 554 students of those kindergarten out of 1,007 had 2 or more ACEs. So going back to those 554 students, they also found that those students were 3 times more likely to not calm down when upset. And we know that about a lot of our kindergarten students. They really have a difficult time sometimes calming down. This is because of these traumatic events. They're twice as likely to rarely play with children outside the family. They have a really hard time with that trust factor. They're twice as likely to not be able to independently button or zipper their clothing. This could be because they haven't had anyone actually even show them how to do that. And 13 times less likely to be able to focus on an activity other than TV or computer. And often what we know about students that are living in a household that has a lot of dysfunction, they're often just placed in front of a computer or a TV and told to just remain quiet and, kind of mind their own business there. So they really have a really difficult time on focusing otherwise. Educators, anyone that's on here, we have to be fully aware of these effects so that we can become trauma skilled. We have to be aware in order to work with our students with ACEs. Here's just some more data for more of the high schooler ages. We know that nearly 70% of young males involved in the foster care system are arrested after leaving foster care, a rate that is 23 times higher than the general population. We know that 86% of runaway children in the United States suspected of being forced into sex work came from the child welfare system, and that 60% of child sex trafficking victims have spent time in the child welfare system. And being in the child welfare system automatically puts an ACE on these students. Awareness is the key. This graphic shows a broad list of the impacts of childhood trauma. And you can see that it affects all aspects of a child or even an adult. You might find yourself there, or maybe you've talked to a parent of one of the students that you're working with, and they will tell you their stories. Cognition, there's poor academic achievement. Under physical health, you see things like poor immune systems. Relationships, poor understanding of social interactions, a lot more anxiety. Acting out sexually in their behavior, teen pregnancy, drug, alcohol misuse. And really in the brain development, less efficient processing. This is the impact of childhood trauma. This is why we have to be aware, but we really have to have deeper conversations about it. Again, the more we are aware, the more we can make a difference for our students and change their behaviors and change their trajectory into adulthood. And what we know, in order to really do that, you have to begin by building relationships. We know that from research that the single most common factor for children to really develop that resilience is at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive adult. There is power in relationships. Notice it says stable, committed, safe, and trusting. A trusted adult can provide personalized responsiveness, scaffolding for students so that they can understand. You scaffold their learning for them in a way that it does not hurt their trajectory. Protection that buffers children from developmental disruption. A trusted adult can build key capacities such as the ability to plan, to monitor, or really to help regulate behavior that enables children to respond adaptively to adversity and to really thrive. We know that most of the students with high number of ACEs have lived in the negative stress cycle as long as they can remember, and often the adults around them have also lived in that world. A trusted adult can help students build these key capacities while also showing stability and commitment to helping the student build trust and also build that resiliency. So that was just a little bit of our research on the first T, trauma awareness. And there is a lot of other information on there. And at the end, I'll give you my email if you want more information from me. I'll be happy to share that with you. So we moved on from you have to be aware, you have to understand all of the things. I didn't go into all the brain research. There's a lot of information about just the amygdala hijack and all the things, but we have to be trauma aware. But now I want to share some information, what we learned about the second T, and that's where we move to becoming trauma skilled. And that's really being able to look at what's happening in our schools. We're aware of what's going on. So now what? Now what are we going to do with that? Now that we know that there's things happening to our students, students are coming with these adverse childhood experiences, what can we do? And really what we know is we want to move from knowledge into that action. So to become trauma skilled, we believe you begin with the student's classroom, where they are living most of their life beyond home. We believe that the classroom is the catalyst for change. And you begin with what we call the prosocial learning ecosystem and the components of that ecosystem in order to have a trauma responsive design in your classroom. And I say a trauma responsive design because you really can set up your classroom so it is conducive for students with trauma. A prosocial learning ecosystem is a classroom environment that it really encompasses those components to accelerate engagement. It is critical to establishing both school climate and culture, and it really consists of these 6 components. It's the safety, and when we talk about safety, we're talking about emotional, social, intellectual, and physical. So you're setting up your classroom to be safe. You're setting up your classroom to involve inclusive relationships, choice, success. Production of language is important, in that proximity. I'm going to delve into each of these components through the lens of helping create the classroom that focuses on the student and meeting their needs, especially for those students with ACEs. So I want you to think about each one of these. I'm going to give you just a little snippet of each one of these. So you can take this back immediately into your classrooms. If you're an administrator here, share this with the presentation with your teachers. These are some immediate things you can do to help students with ACEs in your classrooms. So the first component is about proximity. And we know that proactive proximity is a crucial first step in becoming trauma skilled. Setting up classrooms with proximity in mind lets your teacher have what we call with-itness. And with-itness is a pedagogical term that really describes a teacher's continual awareness of all that's going on in the classroom at all times. You've often heard us say that teachers have eyes in the back of their heads, and with-itness is the chance to really prove it. With-itness allows teachers to know what is happening and also more easily identify and cultivate a culture of safety in the classroom. One way that it can be addressed is through scaffolding experiences and setting up an environment that allows for various learning zones that align to a task. So aligning your spaces to the experiences that are going to happen in that classroom. Proximity has been used as a classroom management strategy for years, but it is really important to ensure that we're not only thinking about our physical space, but also consider our virtual world. We've seen that live out in real time through COVID as teachers are really unable to reach all of their students in their classroom. And we know that a big gap is that some children don't even have access to technology. So for educators, it doesn't even allow for that digital proximity. There are some ways, though, that you can utilize physical proximity and some of the benefits here on this slide that I just want to go over. And you can think of these in terms of that digital proximity too, but this is the physical proximity. And on the next slide, I'll share digital. So stay mobile. A teacher on the move can actively check in with students or groups that are off task and need refocusing. Give your students space. Wait for the behavior to change, then move on. A quick stop shows that you trust in the student's ability really to regulate their own emotions and behaviors. Always keep teaching. Staying on point with the lesson plan is crucial in proximity control. It reinforces your respect for the others and your authority in the classroom. Other students in the classroom have given their attention and they deserve that attention in return. Always check in with everyone. Proximity control doesn't just have to be a behavior management strategy. You can use it as an opportunity to assess and connect with students who need to nudge to take them from good to great and give them control. Once the behavior has been modified, and we're talking about students that really are coming with a lot of trauma, hand them your device. Really, technology gets students actively engaged, and ask them to interact or collaborate on ideas you are presenting brings their focus back to where it needs to be. So those are some things key things you can do for that physical proximity. But remember, proximity is most interesting in a virtual setting because the teacher usually has less physical connection to students, and it's a little bit more difficult really building those relationships. However, with the tablet, the teacher is figuratively right next to the student throughout the day, and many times past the typical school hours, as we all know. Using LMS communication tools and mobile devices, you can virtually stand by all your students in different but powerful ways in comparison to a traditional classroom. Digital proximity can be enhanced for students who have experienced trauma because you can still use some trauma-informed strategies. What we know is that research suggests that when adversity feels like a shared experience, we cope better, not only emotionally, but neurologically. That's why we should be integrating what we call storytelling into online learning. From teenagers who go to Twitter while mourning maybe the death of a close friend, we know that elementary students who whisper to the paper cutout of an ear taped on their classroom door. Trauma studies reveal that the very act of formulating and articulating narratives about our lived realities offers reprieve and promotes resilience. And again, we want to build that resilience. But we also know that there's much more effective ways than having them resort to Twitter or talking to an ear. In your online community, you should be really forthright about your care and concern for students and really the context in which they find themselves. Establish yourself as a safe person to whom they can turn to for support. And you can do this by directly acknowledging the circumstances, and especially in COVID days today, that we're all in the same boat, and being honest about how this situation impacts you. You have to name your emotions, or let students name their emotions. I'm feeling stressed and confused. And because that can teach students by modeling that it's healthy to experience, articulate, and really process emotions in a community, especially during difficult times. Countless trauma studies also suggest that establishing a sense of routine in the face of stress helps students maintain or regain feelings of control, ensuring that they know what to expect. Something as small as a schedule can help give structure to students' days in times of upheaval. We need those schedules when everything else doesn't feel familiar. So include online learning rhythms in your routine, check-ins at the same time of the day, and require reading assignments during a set period. You have to build into your schedule times for debriefing, sharing stories of solidarity, or moments of mindfulness. Knowing what to expect really can help calm students and keep their concerns limited. You want them to be in the classroom feeling that their teacher is there with them and building that relationship. The second component of a prosocial learning ecosystem is safety. Let's think about safety on 4 levels: intellectual safety, emotional safety, social safety, and physical safety. And again, in the course, we dive into these a little bit deeper. But just for now, I want you to think about intellectual safety is really can be increased by an increased sensitivity to feedback and reaction, especially for our students with trauma. You want to provide tasks that don't have one right or wrong answer. Allow reluctant students to really start small and share with you and then a trusted peer of the choice to build their confidence. Emotional safety is the difficult area for students of trauma. Reactions to trauma are not all created equal, as I shared with you. So increased awareness can help you be proactive to head off lose-lose situations. Social safety can be a fragile thing for students, especially in upper elementary, middle, and high school. So you might want to scaffold skills and model in order to help ease transition, as well as structuring tasks for individual accountability, as well as you want to build in that collaboration. And finally, think about that physical safety. It's critical for our students to feel safe. You have to constantly remind your students that responses to trauma aren't all the same, and this is a safe place for you to be, and I'm here for you. This is an example of a real-world scenario leadership academy outside of Dallas. This was an all-boys classroom comprised primarily of African American and Latina boys, and it was a leadership academy setting. And it created a variety of safe spaces for students of different needs. And one key experience for the students in the school at the end was to present to the entire class by the end of the school year. And as many of you know, this can be very difficult for students, even for adults, especially even more so with students of trauma, because they don't always feel like they're being heard, or they haven't really been given that grandstand to be able to stand up and speak. Therefore, this school created a classroom environment that was safe for students physically, emotionally, and intellectually. And going back to what I talked to you about earlier, we say that this is a trauma responsive classroom design, and we can help you to create those trauma responsive classrooms. Students here began working on their presentations in a quiet area where there was no distractions and where they could work independently and without distractions. So they started out kind of in a solo area. They then could move into a one-to-one area where they could share their presentations and get individual feedback that was not overwhelming. And most often this feedback was provided by another student, so it wasn't even with the teacher. Then they moved into small groups of 2, 3, or 4 where they could just sit and read or share their presentation, feel comfortable. You're building up that comfort level. Afterwards, they moved to a small group presentation area. And in this area, the students presented their topic for practice. And this group usually was no more than 6 students. Then when the student was ready, they moved to the big presentation area. And this is the climax for the student, where they get to present to the entire classroom of students and educators what they've been wanting to talk about. And it was up to them what they wanted to share. I want you to notice how this safe classroom is for young boys. They can go back and forth within the various zones until they really feel comfortable. And this type of classroom, remember, this trauma responsive classroom provides them time to perfect their presentations and to feel valued for their learning along the way. The third component of a prosocial learning ecosystem is inclusive relationships. You want to build this into your classrooms. Students with trauma may respond in negative ways when they are overwhelmed in a group. Consider some modifications if needed along the way. Inclusive relationships are an important component of creating a community in the classroom and building trust. So here's some things to remember on your screen. Students who have experienced trauma may need quite a bit of scaffolding to trust others. Consider maybe starting in pairs or moving into groups, just like I just shared with you. Don't allow students to escape building those relationships, however. I often have worked with teachers and they'll say, oh, that child doesn't want to get involved. That's okay, maybe once or twice, but we have to find ways to get those students involved. Remember that team norms will be essential to ensuring that all students have a common language around really what behavior is expected. However, remember that this is a great way to also help integrate that restorative justice instead of just punitive punishment. So keep that in mind. Ensure the team is critical to the process and discourage any kind of alienation, whether self-induced or not. And finally, team roles are important to group functioning. It's all about inclusive relationships. However, you may want to begin with some intentional grouping and maybe some low-risk tasks for students to start feeling comfortable sharing. The fourth area of our prosocial learning ecosystem and really supporting a trauma responsive classroom is choice. Have you ever given students a choice and they give you the deer in the headlights look? I'm sure many of you are laughing at that. Or asked what they want to do and you were given a blank stare and I don't know. Well, many of our students who have experienced abuse will fight, flight, or freeze when they're asked because they're not used to what they choose being okay. So when educators, they think they're providing voice and choice in the classroom, you have to put some scaffolding, some careful guiding at the beginning of an exercise has to be implemented for students of trauma. You might want to think about journaling. Maybe one of the questions is, what are some answers to blank that you'd like to know? This gives students some choice and a platform to find out that their voice matters. Another way to provide choice in your classroom is through product, process, and content. And we know that content is what the students need to learn. And you can allow students to choose a content option that really appeals to their learning ability or style, such as videos or tutorials or podcasts. Process is how students will learn the content. So you might want to allow them to choose to work in small groups or provide them tiered activities. I know many teachers that also incorporate opportunities for individual and even small group work into all their activities, kind of going back to the classroom I just shared with you. And finally, the product is how students will demonstrate what they have learned. There are a variety of choices. This is a great place to let students have a choice. How do they want to showcase their learning? Do they want to share it through a multimedia presentation? Do they want to blog? Do they want to journal? Do they want to stand up and present? Remember that all three provide opportunities for a teacher not to only differentiate instruction, but also to provide student a voice and choice in the best way to showcase their learning. And the last way to give student choice is think about their strengths and preferences. As I stated earlier, relationships are huge in a student's success. If you've considered the other prosocial learning ecosystem components that I've talked to you about and have built trusting relationships, You really are able to help students find their personal strengths and preferences. For many students who have been abused or neglected, they may have often been told of their shortcomings and have been told very little about their strengths. It's also a rare occurrence that their preferences have ever been taken account into. Again, ensure that you provide specific feedback to help students recognize their strengths and preferences, as well as specific ways that it benefits the classroom community. The fifth component is success, and it's all about productive struggle and resilience. And we know that productive struggle builds resilience and leads students to greater learning and success. So consider students with trauma may automatically go into that fight, flight, or freeze whenever a task gets difficult, which I shared with you before. Consider breaking down tasks into chunkable amounts that give students that need it support and really that feedback along the way. You're hearing a lot about that feedback. Trust is also a big factor in developing the resilience needed to have success and stay the course through productive struggle. Consider nonverbal cues such as color coding system for students to let them know if they need help without interrupting the class. I know a classroom teacher that has just little pieces of paper that are red, yellow, green. If there's a red, it means you don't need to stop and say anything to me on my desk. I'm working. I may not look like I'm working, but I'm thinking through. I don't need you to stop and interrupt me. If it's yellow, I may have a question. If it's green, please stop. I need your support. You want to focus on feedback that is constructive. Daily check-ins or more will be critical as students approach big tasks. And rethink work required to be done at home. I can't stress this enough, especially with everything going on in today's world. Many students with chronic trauma are already excellent at reading people and solving problems, but they may have another job once they are at home. They might be taking care of siblings. They may even have a job because they are living alone. It's important for students to be checked in on by adults, but it's just as important for them to check in on themselves in order to be successful. It builds that resilience. These daily check-ins really are all about that zones of regulation. And this might take you back to your college years, but there are really those 4 zones to describe how your brain and body feel. The blue zone is where your body is running slow, such as when you're tired, sick, bored, or just over moving slowly. The green zone is like a green light. You're good to go. Your body may feel happy, calm, and focused. You are ready to learn. Yellow zone describes when you start to lose control, such as when you're frustrated, maybe anxious, worried, feel silly, wiggly, surprised. You might want to use caution there. And then in the red zone, this is for those extreme emotions such as anger, terror, aggression. And when you are in this zone, you are out of control and you have trouble making good decisions and you have to stop. So it's important for students to know that there's 4 zones. It's important for adults to know that you might be in one of these 4 zones at all given times. And throughout the day, you may be in one, may move to another and go back and forth. So it's important for you to be able to check in on yourself and check in on each other. There is this new tool for schools and districts that really helps students determine which zone they're in. So they're able to regulate their own behavior, and it's called Rhythm. And this tool really begins with a simple 5-question assessment that students answer. And it's emoji based, and they answer these 5 questions. What's it like in your head today? And you can see they have a couple of emojis that they can choose from. What's your social life going today? Or how's your social life going today? How's your energy today? How does your body feel today? And how do you feel today? Simple answer with 1. Then there's this great algorithm in the back of this program. And based on the students' answers, they get a personalized activity to complete. It could be a calming or mindfulness activity, a focus activity if they're looking more in the red zone than the green zone, maybe a movement activity such as a stretching or a yoga pose like you see here, or even a visualization or even a gratitude activity. It's really cool because it gives it for individual students and it's less than 2 minutes and they can quickly get in and help them to self-regulate so that they are ready to be engaged and for the learning to take place. The beauty of this is that this was created by clinicians and all of these activities are aligned to the CASEL skills around relationships, responsible decision-making, self-awareness, self-management, and social awareness. Educators can also get this information for each student because it allows you to look at precisely how they've responded on a given time that you ask them to take this. Remember, students can't be truly engaged if they are dealing with other issues. If they have all those ACEs coming in, we've got to help them we can't take it away, unfortunately, but we can help them to self-regulate so that they are ready for learning. So helping them to do that and helping them to keep focused on learning and the experiences is what we can only do as adults. Teachers can also use the tool. I know several administrators that are using it to help support teachers that are feeling stressed and anxious during the COVID epidemic and all the things that's happening in our society right now. It's a great check-in point as well. We know that teachers need wellness checks too. So I know I've been talking about students, but it's so important for teachers to have that self-care. So I highly recommend the book called Whole, What Teachers Need to Help Students Thrive. This showcases the latest research on teacher well-being and the correlation with student learning, along with strategies to support school and district leaders and teachers. Teachers cannot help students if they haven't taken care of themselves first. And we have a lot of teachers feeling a lot of anxiety. In fact, at the end of this session, which I'm getting close to, MJ has been collecting the name of participants here, and he's going to draw a name for one of you, and I am going to send you a book. I'll have to get your address, but I will send you one of these books for free. If you do want a copy of it, you might want to go, you can pick up a copy at www.habitatforheroes.org. And I believe MJ can put into the chat box a code so you can get a discount as well. So stay to the end and one of you will win a book. Component 6, our last component of our prosocial learning ecosystem, is thinking about the production of language. We know that words have power. Most relationships suffer because of lack of communication. Students need to be able to produce language that helps them not only do well in school, but also in life. Prosocial classrooms really reflect the leading research on literacy. We know that literacy rests on the production of language, not simply the input of language. Reading or listening is not enough. Authentic literacy includes the ability for students to produce language and utilize vocabulary with their peers through collaborative tasks and productive student conversations. And finally, academic discourse through speech and writing is the definition of literacy. You can only showcase your learning in two ways. You can speak or you can write. That's the only way we can tell if you actually understand what you've just heard. Literacy is what you can hear and see. You can only see that visible learning through what they produce. Therefore, it's important for educators and really important for you to surround students with authentic vocabulary and structures to really help them produce the language that's purposeful. Think about how the experts help students with trauma. It is through therapy and talking. Without words, students are at an extreme disadvantage. So those are the 6 components of a prosocial learning ecosystem. And I've spent the majority of our time today really focusing on the first 2 T's, trauma awareness and trauma skilled. And I've only given you a snippet of each one of those. But these are 2 areas you and your school teams really need to begin focusing on in order to support your students with trauma. And I want to go even beyond. It's not just students with trauma, students with stress, teachers with stress. We all need to understand what's going on because there's a lot of negativity going on in the world, and we're here to support each other. I don't want to just end, though, by not sharing what is that third T, and that's all about trauma readiness. And trauma readiness really encompasses all the things you need to consider in your trauma readiness plan in order for your school or district to be a safe place for students to be. It's about a school-wide implementation, creating systems that really transform school climate, supporting relationships and problem solving among students and staff, and forging the path from trauma aware to trauma ready. So what I mean by that is when we're focusing on trauma awareness, it's all the information about trauma. When we focus on trauma skilled, it's what's happening and what we can do in the classroom. What are those prosocial learning ecosystem? What are the things we can do in the classroom where the classroom can become a catalyst for change? The third area is to be trauma ready is now how can we become trauma ready as a school-wide implementation or a district implementation? What are the things we need to consider? So when we wrote the course for USC, we really focused on for the third module, and many of these were ideas that you actually could take each thing and each were individual topics, and it was about leadership. And so here were some of the topics, and I'm not going to go into all of them because each of them could be standalone topics, but thinking about moving from a trauma skill to a trauma ready. What is safety at scale? Creating trauma sensitive schools. How do you create a district or school culture of caring? How do you create trauma-informed policies and procedures? All about those policies and procedures that are really trauma-informed. Thinking about what kind of discipline plan do you have in your classroom? What kind of leading trauma? How do you lead a trauma sensitive school? That's all about the leadership and what they have to do in order to get that moving in their schools. Responding to a crisis in a trauma informed manner. We talk about that. The students with trauma, if we don't catch them, many of them unfortunately lead to what we see in school shooting. We see a lot of things happening with these students. How can we respond to that in a trauma informed manner? Not only for the trying to lead up to that we don't have the crisis, but what happens if we have the crisis? That's going to trigger for students that already have gone through trauma, even more trauma. And then finally, we end the whole course with thinking about the rigors and the relevance and really thinking about the road to resiliency. Resiliency is all about being able to bounce back. So how do we help students be able to bounce back? I said it earlier, we can't change what's happened to our students. We can't change what's happened to us as adults, but we can change the trajectory of our students and we can help them to become resilient. So this has been a snapshot of the 3 components of trauma: trauma awareness, trauma skilled, and trauma ready. The key is for you to move through the continuum. You don't want to skip the steps, but work through each area through deep conversations with each other, setting goals and planning with the student's safety in mind. We talk about in the course about creating a trauma ready implementation team. That'll be the group that'll start getting the ball rolling for your school and really thinking about what can we do differently to help and support our students. You want to really focus on building relationships, utilizing those strategies that help students self-regulate, building resilience and becoming that's for students so that they can become successful. And you want to consider the 6 components of a prosocial classroom ecosystem. Finally, you want to lead to that plan for trauma readiness that meets your goals, your school or district goals, and most importantly, your students' needs. And every community is different and everybody has a different need. No plan can just be written for everybody and said, here's the plan for everybody in this, and even in the district, a large districts, they have to have individual plans because of the various things that are happening within the community. So I want to thank you so much for your time with me this afternoon. If you want more information about any of the things, I'm going to give you my email on the next slide. There will be a demo on February 9th, and I believe that MJ will put that in the chat for you. If you want to know more about Rhythm, the app that I share with you, that's super, super fun to use. If you want me or someone from Media Education to talk to you about what does trauma responsive classroom design, we would be happy to do a free consult with you, share out some of our ideas and some of the things we've been working through. If you want more information on the T3 certification course, which is CEU credited, so you can get CEU credits for it, there's a small fee for that, but we could talk to you about that. And finally, the whole book, I would be happy to be able to share that out with you. I gave you the Habitat for Heroes website, and I believe we're going to give one away. I'm going to go ahead and click on the last screen that has my email address, as well as Kim Bolzer, who can also answer any of your questions for you. And I hope to see many of you on our future webinars. So thank you so much for attending today and have a great afternoon.